So we're into Unit 5 now, and first we're going to look at inverses of functions part 2. So just as a reminder, I'm going to write a really simple function up here, such as y equals 5x plus 2. When we say inverse, that means switch x and y. So we would get x equals 5y plus 2. So that's the step that finds the inverse, and then to get the new function, we would solve for the y. So we'd subtract 2. And then divide by 5. Now, because this is a linear function, I could leave it as it is, or I could write it in mx plus b form. Okay. Now, the inverses we're doing today are going to be more complex functions, so they're not going to be something that we would even write in mx plus b form because they're not linear. So moving on to our first example, letter A. It says find formulas for the inverse of each of the following simple polynomial and rational functions. So just like every inverse problem, the first thing we do is switch x and y. And then we're going to look for inverse operations, or how are we going to get rid of each thing. Now, when we do this, we have to think about using the reverse order of operations. So we all know that we use PEMDAS when we're simplifying. So maybe, or maybe not, you've heard this before, but when we solve and when we move things over, it's like we're peeling them away. So we actually use something called SADMEP, so it's backwards. So as I look at this, I'm going to start from the furthest thing out. So even though there's a parentheses here, right, that's down here, and there's an exponent, that's here. The first thing in this list, if we work this way, that we're going to get rid of is that multiplication or division. So the very first thing I'm going to do is divide both sides by 2. And SADMEP seems kind of obvious to some people, but I find that some students maybe haven't thought about that. It's basically what you've been doing when you've been solving things since you started solving, but now we have to think about it a little bit more because things are more complicated. So the next thing, I got rid of this. Now I'm going to work on this exponent. So the opposite of cubed is a cube root. Okay, so that cancels, and I need to take the cube root of both sides. So I'm left with the cube root of x over 2 equals y minus 2. So now we're inside the parentheses. So even though that's subtraction, that was inside a parentheses, so that's the last thing I get rid of. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So this gives me y equals the cube root of x over 2 plus 2, and that is my inverse function. So let's move over to the next example. I'm going to erase this part over here just so we can see it. So here we have function notation. We're going to replace that with a y so that we can switch the x and y. So if you have f of x or g of x, that's what you want to do first. So switching my x and y, I'm going to get x equals the 5th root of y plus 4 minus 6. So I write that down. First thing I'm going to look for is any addition and subtraction. We have a minus 6, so I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So I don't see any multiplication or division, so I'm going to move on to exponents. And if you were wondering, and we'll talk more about this next unit, roots fall into the same category as exponents. The opposite of the 5th root is the 5th power. Now on these problems, you do not have to do x plus 6 times itself 5 times. We are not simplifying these. You can just leave them as they are. So over here I have y plus 4 left. Okay, now basically in a root is like being inside a parentheses. So even though it's addition, that's why we're going to do it last. So then I just subtract 4 from both sides. So this gives me y equals x plus 6 to the 5th minus 4. And if we started out with an f of x, we need to replace that with the inverse notation. which is f inverse of x. And that is my final answer. So this notation we learned in that first unit, this is just how you say something's an inverse of a function. So I would actually suggest pausing the video and trying these two. I'm going to go through them really quickly. It's those same basic concepts, but to try two and then check will help you out before you do delta math. So hopefully you've done these already. I'm going to make this a y, switch x and y. Now looking through here, basically this is all in a parentheses because it's in a fraction. So I'm going to get rid of this 2 divided by 2 first, giving me 2x equals 4 plus 4y to the third. 2's canceled. Then I'm going to subtract the 4, giving me 2x minus 4 equals 4y to the third. Next thing I'm going to get rid of is that third, and I'm going to use a cube root. So the cube root of 2x minus 4 equals 4y. And lastly, we're going to divide by 4. Now looking back, my function notation is f of x. So I'm going to call this f inverse of x. So f inverse of x, sorry, that's messy. Let's write that again. F inverse of x is this new formula or function, cube root of 2x minus 4 over 4. So this is my answer. I'm going to leave that up. I'll erase it when I need to move it out of the way for g of x. Maybe we'll try to avoid it. We'll do the inverse of g of x over here. So cross this out, write a y, switch x and y. So we're going to move that 4 over first. Multiply by 7 next. Once again, I could distribute here. I'm just going to leave it. But that's actually a spot where it wouldn't be hard to distribute the 7 because there's no exponent there. But as I said, we're not going to simplify these because sometimes they're super hard to simplify. So next I'm going to subtract the 5. And if you're having trouble following, I would go back to the first two. I want to keep the video decently short, but I'm not talking about that sad map. Basically, that's how I'm deciding what I remove. This is a square root, so the opposite is squared. So I have 7 times x plus 4 minus 5 squared equals 3y. And lastly, I'm going to divide by 3. Now to save space, I am just going to write this with the correct notation, which would be g inverse of x. So g inverse of x equals 7 times x plus 4 minus 5 squared over 3. And as I said, this might look a little better on this one if I simplified, like I multiplied out the 7x plus 28 and then subtracted 5, but we're going to leave it like that.